Hey everyone, it's Alex, and welcome to the Marvel Snap Decks of the Week, the weekly series where I showcase the top 10 best decks in Marvel Snap. If you can tell that my voice is given out, it's because we've been streaming for like 14 hours thanks to the Twitch drops. And if you haven't yet joined our Twitch community live, then definitely use the link in the description down below. Hit that follow button on Twitch so you can be up to date with our streams, catch us live, and most importantly, engage with what is an absolutely wonderful community on Twitch TV. With that being said, let's get started with deck number one, which is Dark Bolt, a 55% win rate, 0.21 cube rate deck. Now, we actually have a little bit of a resurgence here happening with Darkhawk, and we're kind of trying to navigate the best way to play the new 5-cost Darkhawk. And, well, we got this Black Bolt stature base shell, which is actually pretty neat, but the thing that kind of holds it back is what has always held Black Bolt back, is that at the end of the day, you're discarding rocks from your opponent's hand. If you're playing Korg and you're playing Rock Slide on curve, then you're likely discarding a rock with Silver Samurai and maybe then hitting something with Black Bolt. Otherwise, you're just hitting rocks out of their hands and not really disrupting all that much. Really looking forward to the day where Black Bolt starts to hit some major pieces out of their hand, but until then, this is the best we can do. The deck is pretty good. Its win rate is pretty solid. However, the cube rate is a little on the low side. Keep in mind, these are all high infinite statistics. So at the end of the day, maybe Darkhawk could have a couple other chances to make a splash in the meta, and maybe that's what this next deck does actually, because it is another Darkhawk deck. Now this one here is Darkhawk Bounce, and it's actually a pretty interesting list. What it essentially does is something very similar to the other, except it has a Nihilist base shell, which of course is just remarkable with Bounce. That hood getting brought back by Beast or by Falcon is very useful. You got the disruption of Rock Slide, of course. You got the Kitty Pryde, Angela, Hope Summers package. And with the Annihilus and the Red Hulk, I mean, you have that verticality of Red Hulk, the versatility of the Annihilus package. There's a lot going on with this deck that I really like. And of course, as I said before, you've got Darkhawk. So we got two Darkhawk decks that are trying to like make a little bit of a splash on the meta. This one has a 56% win rate and a 0.26 cube rate, so slightly higher statistically, although it is a little more difficult to pilot. What I will say though is what keeps this deck kind of higher in the win rate and cube rate perspective is probably the Annihilus and Sentry package, which honestly is just so damn good. And of course, if you're not bouncing back your hood, you can use your hood as part of the send over for Annihilus. So ultimately a very strong package. Darkhawk making a bit of a comeback. That takes us to number 8, and this was a deck that we spoke about in the past as well, and it's Red Shuri. Shuri's making a comeback in the meta. We like to see it because, I mean, Shuri was kind of being slept on for the longest time over the last couple months, and now we're starting to see it come back. Once again, it's kind of being driven by this ability to Red Hulk and then Taskmaster, which is kind of crazy. If you play Hope Summers, then you play onto Hope Summers, you can play the Red Hulk out early and then follow up with the Taskmaster on the later turn, I should clarify. But realistically, you just have a bunch of good pieces here. You have really good pieces for Shuri. You have really good pieces for the Angela, Elsa Bloodstone, Kitty Pryde package, of course. And at the end of the day, Shuring a Vision is always a good idea because it's so mobile, very hard to shun-chi. A lot of good things happening with this deck, and so the cube rate of 0.29 and the win rate of 56% is indicative of its capabilities of getting you to infinite. That takes us to number 7. It's been a bit of a drop off for discard here because I think there's a lot of, first of all, there's a lot of Cosmo coming back into the meta because you have a lot of Zemo based decks kind of being played because of the weekend mission featuring Yondu. It isn't quite traditional discard. What you've got is you've got the Strong Guy in there, which you don't often see very often, right? Strong Guy being played now, which is really nice to see. I mean, it's pretty much the deck that it's always been, except Strong Guy instead of Corvus Glaive. Corvus Glaive getting cut for Strong Guy. And honestly, if you want to add Corvus Glaive back in, you just remove Strong Guy and you got yourself a pretty interesting deck. It's worth noting here is that Gambit's being used as a splash. Gambit pretty good in the current meta at trading very important pieces on the board, especially if you're able to hit something very juicy like a Red Hulk or something along those lines, especially if you play it later on in the game, because hey, if you got Apocalypse and Draco's on the board and you haven't played MODOK, then you can use your Gambit to discard what's in your hand. So anyways, we have discard at 0.22, drop off in cube rate, but still a pretty solid deck. And that takes us to Red Havoc. Now this is a brand new deck that I saw. I believe the first person that covered this deck was Regis, and it might have originated from Safety Blade. I'm not 100% sure. Trying to like track down the origins of decks can be tricky at times, but it's pretty damn interesting. And this deck is actually flying in the meta right now at a 57% win rate and one of the highest cube rates of the week at 0.47. This is an absolute banger, and what makes it even better is the use of Havoc. I've always been a Havoc believer, and quite frankly, I haven't quite found the Havoc deck that really made it work to like an amazing degree, and maybe this is it. Maybe this is the Havoc deck we've been waiting for. It's a little expensive on the side of Red Guardian and Cannonball, two cards that, well, Red Guardian's still in the spotlight caches, but Cannonball was kind of a, you know, we'll just say slept on card to some degree. And now we find ourselves in a meta where people are starting to really think about Cannonball, especially with the amount of Zemo being played, because people are junking up their own boards and making themselves susceptible to Cannonball. So Zemo Cannonball being kind of interesting here. So this is going to be the first of many decks that feature Cannonball, which might be frustrating to some, but Cannonball is suddenly having this major resurgence in the meta, and it starts with Red Havoc. And that takes us to the next deck here, which is the Cannon Clog. Cannon Clog at a 58% win rate, a much weaker cube rate than the previous deck featuring Havoc. But once again, you're having the debris play, which is pretty interesting with the Doc Ock. What you're trying to do, though, is you're trying to set up a situation where Cannonball can essentially destroy an enemy card, or you're at least disrupting the enemy positions by using cards like Green Goblin, even Titania to some degree, and of course debris. Now, once again, there's a lot of interest out there for Baron Zemo-based decks utilizing Yondu. Now, obviously, Yondu doesn't even make the cut in this particular list, but Zemo is actually performing pretty well at a 0.30 cube rate, a 58% win rate. And again, it's that Cannonball. It's Cannonball that's a kind of a surprise here, which is pretty awesome. And Cosmo, a very useful tech card in many decks right now, which I think is kind of going underappreciated as well. And I think Cosmo's having a bit of a comeback in the meta. I mean, this whole week is just comeback kid after comeback kid, because there's all these cards that we're almost never seeing play that are suddenly getting play again. You got Darkhawk, Cosmo, you got Cannonball. So it's kind of interesting to see. And I mean, just Mill in general being brand new. So Zemo Cannon, a pretty solid deck. And again, I mean, you add Red Hulk in there, you get the verticality, you got the power, and the Daredevil is going to be able to punish you with that Professor X more often than not, or punish your opponent, I should say. So anyways, that's Zemo Cannon at number 4. That takes us to the number 3, and that is going to be Pixie Deathstrike. Now, Pixie Deathstrike was a deck that came onto the scene last week. I believe this deck originated from Jeff Hoagland, and honestly, it's a very inventive deck, and it's awesome. It's the best place you're going to find Lady Deathstrike, a 58% win rate and a very strong cube rate of 0.30. I like the idea that if you don't draw into your Nihilist, you can utilize your Lady Deathstrike as a backup play to clear out your Void or your Hood or whatever it happens to be. The Pixie, I mean, I'm not completely sold on Pixie, but my experience with this deck was like, hey, I play down Pixie, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, my Red Hulk is like a 1 cost now, right? So it's kind of cool what can happen with Pixie, and when you snap, I feel like it's a very high equity kind of cube card, because cube equity card, I should say, because like your opponent's gonna be a little terrified, because like anything can happen with that Pixie. Any card can be discounted. They can have a Sentry at 1, right? So it's kind of crazy to think of what Pixie is able to do from like a, you know, tilting your opponent out perspective. But honestly, this deck is by far the top Lady Deathstrike buff deck out there. So a really interesting and inventive design, and it's performing very well in the meta. That takes us to our top 2, and the New Groove continues to be one of the top decks in the meta, getting knocked off from the number 1 spot, but still at number 2. Very strong win rate at 59% and a very strong cube rate at 0.36. Overall, a very strong deck for all the reasons why you've come to learn over the last couple weeks: the mobility, the disruption, and of course the Captain Marvel and Vision being procced by Elsa Bloodstone. That's a lot of power that's very mobile in helping you close out wins that you might not have otherwise been able to close out. And of course you have the Red Hulk, which continues to be absolutely powerful, and you have Red Hulk and a whole bunch of mobility as well, with like Nightcrawler and Silk and Jeff and everyone else that's moving around, Vision of course. So very mobile, very powerful deck. You have the verticality and you have the mobility. It does a little bit of everything, and it's one of the best decks in the game. But it's not the best deck in the game, and to my surprise was a Zabu deck running a 60% win rate and a 0.31 cube rate. So the cube rate consistent with some of the other ones, but its win rate a touch higher. I was interested to see Zabu here, and it's Zabu with Shang-Chi, with Miss Marvel, with Jessica Jones, and with Iron Lad, and you have the Doctor Doom and the Red Hulk. Miss Marvel and Doctor Doom are being played as a pair almost always in order to kind of use those Doom bots to proc the effect. But it's interesting to think that like we got a Negasonic in here. Like, is there actually a Negasonic? What's interesting is that people are playing the Storm if they don't draw the Zabu. So you play Storm on 3, and then you follow up with like Nebula and Negasonic on turn 4. And so what happens is they play into the Negasonic and they explode if you have initiative, which is pretty damn interesting. The Negasonic is always a surprise play. It can be kind of hard to land, but you're going to want initiative when you're playing Negasonic, and quite frankly, it's a game winner. It's a cube stealer, and so it's interesting to see at the top of the meta a Zabu-based deck. And honestly, I think Zabu's terrible. And statistically, like I fact-checked this across a couple sites, and I'm like, damn, Zabu's actually performing. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on that next Marvel Snap video.